Good evening. On behalf of the commissioners and staff, I'd like to welcome you to the November 15th, 2022 meeting of the City of Roseville's Transportation Commission. Will everyone at this time please put all personal electronic devices into silent mode? If you need or would like to follow along with an agenda, they're available at the end of the staff table. If you're at home watching, all meeting documents are available online at the city's website for the Transportation Commission. And if you plan to speak at tonight's meeting, please complete a blue speaker card and return it to the staff table. Lainey, can you please call roll?
Commissioner Lasrica. Here. Commissioner Festerson. Here. Commissioner Groff.
Here.
Commissioner Huskins.
Present. Present.
Commissioner Probst.
Here.
Commissioner Radford and Commissioner Short are absent.
And Commissioner Festerson, can you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes. Right hand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Marilyn. Public comment is a time for anyone who would like to address the Commission on any transportation-related item that is not on tonight's agenda. Speakers shall restrict their comments to issues that are within the subject jurisdiction of the Transportation Commission and limit their comments to 3 minutes. The Brown Act, with certain exceptions, does not permit the Transportation Commission to discuss or take action on issues that are not listed on the agenda. Also, please state your name for the record. Any takers? Okay. The next item in the agenda is item 5.1, approval of the September 20th, 2022 minutes. Would anyone like to make a motion and a second to approve the September minutes?
So moved.
All right. Commissioner Huskins has made the motion and Commissioner Groff has seconded the motion. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion is approved. The next item in the agenda is requests and presentations. Item 6.1, a 2050 regional transportation plan and annual unmet transit needs. Staff, can we please have your presentations?
Good evening, Commissioners. Tonight's presentation on the Regional Transportation Plan and our annual unmet transit needs will be done by staff members from the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, otherwise known as PCTPA. Tonight's presentation will consist of 2 parts. The first part of the presentation will discuss the Regional Transportation Plan, while the second part of the presentation will discuss the annual unmet transit needs process. The presentation will be paused between the 2 subjects in order to give commissioners an opportunity to ask questions and/or provide comments. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Mike Costa and Corey Peterson from PCTPA.
Good evening. Can you guys hear me? Is this supposed to be on? Good evening, members of the Commission. Thanks for having us. We're really excited to come down here to Roseville and talk to you guys about the Regional Transportation Plan and the unmet transit needs. Like Ed said, my name is Corey Peterson. I'm a Senior Transportation Planner with PCTPA. And with that, we'll go ahead and begin. Next slide, please. So first, let me just talk about, for those who are unfamiliar, what PCTPA is. So we are the Regional Transportation Planning Agency for Placer County. So we help to plan, fund, and program transportation projects throughout the county, particularly some of the kind of the larger projects like the 8065 interchange, widening 65 Placer Parkway, and widening Baseline Road out to Sutter County. PCTPA helps to work on those projects and get them delivered. As the RTPA for Placer County, we're required to update what's called a regional transportation plan every 5 years. And so essentially what that is, it's a chance for us to bring together all of our stakeholders in transportation, all the cities in Placer County, all of our stakeholders, Caltrans, to help and plan out all of our transportation projects for the next 25 years. So right now we have our current adopted plan from 2019 goes out to the year 2040. And so what that is it contains a list of transportation projects that we hope to achieve in a fiscally constrained environment. So what I mean by that is the RTP projects out revenue that we reasonably expect to obtain in the next 25 years, and then bases our project list off of that. So we also get a chance to update our goals and policies and really talk about where we want to take our transportation system through to 2050. We also do this kind of in connection with a similar planning effort from the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, or SACOG, and they are required to update their Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy, or MTP-SCS. We love our acronyms in government. And so the MTP-SCS covers the entire six-county Sacramento region, and that's kind of it's a similar type of planning effort where it's a long-range planning document. Actually, can you go to the next slide, please? That kind of leads into the next slide, so I'll go ahead and go over there. So the kind of the similarities between the two plans are they're both long-range documents. They both go out, to kind of a similar type of planning horizon, and they both contain lists of near-term and long-term transportation projects. In both cases, if you want to get a federal or state funding for a project, it has to be in your county's RTP and as well as in the MTP for the SACOG region. They both contain, population forecasts and kind of revenue forecasts, or what we reasonably expect to receive, and then the project list. The difference is that here the RTP is kind of like your local boots on the ground type of plan that helps to kind of bring together our projects and advocate them to make sure that we're getting them funded and delivered. There are also additional requirements that SACOG has to meet, like the Federal Clean Air Act, or SB 375, looking at greenhouse gas emission goals, and how does the region's project list help to meet those goals. Next slide. So I think it's no secret to anybody that Placer County is growing very fast. This is kind of numbers that were derivative from the last RTP, but we expect that by 2050, we're going to be over 500,000 people. For reference, Placer County is just over 400,000 currently, adding over 63,000 new jobs and over 55,000 new homes. Before the pandemic, 2/3 of Placer County residents commuted outside the county, the large share of them going, probably not surprisingly, into Sacramento County. But this might have changed. We want to take a look at that in our current RTP and how commute patterns may have shifted. More people are working from home. A lot of state workers haven't come back to the office yet. How are our commute patterns changing post-COVID? Next slide. So looking back at the last RTP, I included this graphic just to kind of give you an idea of what sort of expenditures, what type of projects we included in a regional transportation plan. A lot of them are road projects. We include quite a bit of our budget for new roads or expanding roads, as well as maintaining them, so fixing potholes and repaving. A pretty good portion of them are for public transit, about 22%, and then the remainder is for bike and ped projects or planning efforts like the RTP, and also kind of managing our existing infrastructure and looking at, traffic signal timing or other, kind of operational improvements. Next slide. And then, of course, here in Roseville, we just wanted to highlight a few projects that are either going through the delivery process or ones that are recently completed. Of course, as you guys know, there's a lot happening here. Looking at some of the projects that are currently going on are 65 widening Baseline Road out towards Sutter County, Santucci Boulevard extension, as well as the Dry Creek Greenway that's going to be going under construction here pretty soon. And of course, the completed one, Washington Boulevard Bikeway and pedestrian pathway improvements. And I personally love the green paint. I think it looks very nice. So I think it's a very well job done. Next slide. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Costa. He's going to talk about kind of our work plan for the upcoming 2050 RTP, and then we'll be happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Corey, and good evening, commissioners and members of the public. As Corey mentioned, this effort that we do is kind of our bread and butter at Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, or PCTPA. It's really important that when we're creating this document, we use and we work very closely with all of our local jurisdictions to get the projects that are already planned and already being developed by the local jurisdiction. So we don't just pull projects out of thin air. And we also want to make sure that the projects that we identify in our financially constrained plan are projects that a sponsoring agency like the City of Roseville or other jurisdictions in Placer County are actually willing to deliver. We're not going to just put in a project into the plan that nobody can actually deliver. So those are types of things that we consider when we're building our project lists. And in that kind of graphic, you see all the different plans that projects are coming from. They're coming from our old regional transportation plan. So there's actually a lot of projects, as Corey had mentioned, in the 2040 regional transportation plan that will carry over into the 2050 regional transportation plan. Of course, they'll be updated based on new estimates, inflationary cost estimates, as well as what can be delivered when. So those are things that we consider when building the project list. We also look at new policies or new goals that our PCTPA board, which actually consists of a representative member from every jurisdiction, including the City of Roseville. Council member Hodeschelt is actually the representative from Roseville on our PCTPA board. So we consider any new updates to the overall goals and policies from our board for our new regional transportation plan as well. And then the other thing is public outreach, which is why we're here actually this evening. We do engage the public in various courses throughout this plan to really incorporate and learn from and hear and how translate feedback on how that gets put into projects. And so those are things that we consider when building our project list for the regional transportation plan moving forward into the 2050 plan. Next slide, please. Some of the other things that we have to consider, as Corey again mentioned, is that we are a financially constrained document. So that means that all of the anticipated or forecasted federal, state, and local dollars, we have to constrain our project list to those forecast estimates. We work with our partners actually at SACOG, the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, to project the financial revenue assumptions, because in the end, the project list that we establish here in Placer County is the project list we give to SACOG to put into their MTPSCS. They're one and the same. So we don't have different project lists. They actually put our project list into their plan. That's our agreement with them. So that's what we have to look at with them. We have to make sure that our estimates and our forecasts are valid with kind of their estimates and forecasts, because they're the same constraints. The other thing that we look at in terms of revenue, one of the most interesting things that happened last year was the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA for short. Again, we love our acronyms. But basically what that did was it actually established new funding programs at the federal level for regional transportation projects as well as local transportation projects. And so we're looking at what the IIJA means for our region. The IIJA, in summary, infused almost 30% more federal funds than the last infrastructure bill that was passed, which was the FAST Act, if any of you recall that conversation 5-6 years ago. So there are new funding sources. We're looking at how those funding sources translate into our forecasts. And then the other thing that we consider, especially in this portion of Placer County, in the South Placer region, in Rockland, Roseville, and Lincoln, is how a potential future sales tax measure or funding strategy, as you've seen in your local community, fits into this plan. Because a lot of those projects will need local dollars, because as many of you also may know, the federal requirements for federal dollars are requiring more and more match money in order to secure federal or state dollars. So we're looking at, of course, alternative solutions to local transportation funds, such as potential sales tax measures in the future, and how that fits into our plan. Next slide, please. Other things outside of the goals and objectives that I talked about earlier that our board reexamines every time we go through this cycle is a new lens that the state of California actually passed under the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, or CAPTI for short. What CAPTI does is it's not actual legislation, but rather a plan and program by which it changes the lens upon how state agencies look at their funding for transportation. What that means for us is that since we as a region and local agencies like Roseville as well go after federal and state dollars for transportation funding, those programs, those competitive programs, now have this new lens of CAPTI to look at whether or not those projects are actually competitive throughout the state. So we're looking at CAPTI, we're looking at how does CAPTI impact our projects, how they're potentially designed, making sure that are the projects considering some of the state's goals under CAPTI, which address some climate action issues as well as equity, health and safety. Those are all things we can't control, but we can look at and work with our local partners here at Roseville and other parts of Placer County to make projects potentially more ready or more competitive for this type of funding that has this lens built upon it now as of 2021. The other thing that Corey mentioned in terms of greenhouse gas emission reductions, that's another thing we have to look at as part of our projects. The state of California has some goals that are set into place for greenhouse gas emission reduction targets that we have to meet as a 6-county region. So our project list is part of that effort to meet that goal. It's 19% in this region. And so we have to kind of look at how our projects collectively compared with all the rest of the regional projects in our investment list meet and attain that goal. VMT reduction, VMT stands for vehicle miles traveled. That was passed under Senate Bill 743 at the state level. So we have to look at projects in terms of how projects are reducing vehicle miles traveled. So in the past, we looked at how projects reduced congestion or level of service, which is LOS. That has flipped, and now projects have to look at reduction of VMT. So that kind of impacts sometimes the way that projects are designed, and so we work with our local partners on that as well. And then lastly, as I mentioned, the equity, environmental justice, but then performance metrics, looking at how we can evaluate the progress of our plan as it is implemented in future years. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, public engagement and public outreach is a big part of this effort. We are conducting our first round of public engagement, one of potentially 4 rounds of public engagement during this process. In this first round of public engagement, we are visiting all of the local jurisdictions to just make awareness of this regional transportation plan out there and known. But we also are looking for our second part, we're looking for feedback. We do have a survey that's available in that link that you see on the slide before you, which is pctpa.net/RTP2050. On that link, that sends you to the webpage for our survey, and you'll see the survey right in the front of the webpage, and it's available in English and in Spanish and Tagalog upon request. But that survey is designed to really help us identify potentially what are the priorities of residents here, their transportation priorities in Placer County. So we ask questions like, how would you rank road projects versus transit projects? How would you rank bike and ped versus this? And so we're really trying to see, again, we ask a series of questions that are designed to look at what are the priorities of the majority of our residents here in Placer County. So we encourage people to take that survey that's available now, and that'll be available through December 16th. The last part is we are holding 3 workshops. Actually, they're not all 3 virtual. 2 of them are virtual. December 6th and 8th are going to be virtual workshops, and that information is available on our website as well through that link on the slide. But then there'll be a workshop on December 7th that will be held at PCTPA's offices in Auburn, and that'll be in person. And that, again, will provide opportunities. All 3 of those workshops will provide opportunities for the public to weigh in, ask questions about this process, as well as weigh in on the transportation priorities for the region. And lastly, we are going to be attending as many pop-up events that we can, pending our staff resources, which you see them right here. And we'll try to pair up on existing local events here in the county or events that we might be engaging the public with, especially in Roseville for the funding strategy effort. So you'll see us kind of pairing up to as many existing events that we can in the region. Next slide, please. A little bit about the schedule. This may change. It's a little bit in flux because we do work with SACOG on this effort, and we kind of pair it with their MTP SCS development, but we are looking at right now targeting our first public engagement round to end in December, and then we're going to be looking at establishing our goals and policies and objectives, or I would say revamping those from the last RTP plan in February, and then working with SACOG to finalize a project list. We've already went out to the local communities, especially here at the city of Roseville. We already worked with your local public works staff as well as your alternative transportation staff to identify potential projects to go into the 2050 RTP. So we'll be refining that at the beginning of next year to look at the constraints that I mentioned, the population forecast, the financial constraints, and seeing what we can do. And hopefully by next summer into fall, we'll have a final list and we'll be able to see what that final list does in terms of performances and all the metrics associated with the blueprint efforts and all of the greenhouse gas emission reductions and all of that, so that we can bring it back out to the public to demonstrate and show, here's what this project list is, here's what it does. We need further input, and then we can even further refine it from that point. So that's all into next year. And then the final goal is to adopt this plan preferably at the end of 2024. That may get delayed slightly into 2025, but we are targeting a December of 2024 adoption of the Regional Transportation Plan. Next slide, please. Okay, so actually that was the last slide for the Regional Transportation Plan. At this point, I'd be happy to take any questions that the Commission may have about this Regional Transportation Plan process.
I had a question. In terms of the VMT, the vehicle miles traveled, explain to me how that kind of weaves into the goal of it in terms of, is it to basically reduce overall VMT or to create options that help people reduce that? Or because it kind of almost seems sort of counter the idea. I mean, tell me how that works in terms of the approach.
Right. So in terms of this high level of a plan, we don't go into project-specific details of VMT reduction. That really is done at the local level whenever you have a project that's in the development cycles, like a roadway project, even a bike and ped project potentially. Those look at the VMT. We kind of look at it from a higher level performance. What is our project list doing? Is it reducing VMT or is it not reducing VMT? And if it isn't reducing VMT, is there a way that we can incorporate alternative projects that help it to reduce VMT further? So that's how we look at it from the planning level. We don't quite dive into project-specific level. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
Do you know off the top of your head how many people have responded to the survey?
As of right now, I don't. I know the survey was launched in early November.
It was launched on November 1st.
November 1st, and we are in the initial phases of really pushing hard, starting actually next week, to get people to actually participate in the survey. And that survey, since it's available through December 18th, just with staffing resources and everything, we haven't been able to push as hard as we've wanted, but now we're actually starting next week really pushing hard to get people to respond.
Do you think it would be possible to send out an email to residents? I don't know, just an idea.
Absolutely. I know one of our strategies is to work very closely. In fact, we're working with a consulting team that works very closely with this city and works with all the other jurisdictions in Placer County to send out information to like the local PIOs, especially here in Roseville. You have a very good PIO staff. And so we'll be working with those staffs to send out the messages on a local level as much as we can also send it out on a regional level.
There's also going to be some social media pushes as well. So we have an informational video that's going to be promoted on social media as well. It actually stars us.
It's our actual voices.
But yeah, you'll start to see that sometime next week. We're going to be promoting that pretty heavily. And like Mike said, we'll be in touch with city staff to make sure they get some sharing the socials and stuff.
Thank you.
A couple questions and a comment. So you talked about the IIJA and the FAST Act, I believe it was, as funding sources. And of course, there's gas tax and sales tax and everything. Can you briefly talk about anything in the past, measures or sales tax increases that were voted on and approved by the voters that are still considered one of your funding sources now?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones, if I can answer your question correctly, is Senate Bill 1, which was the gas tax that was applied to the state of California several years ago now at this point. That will still be into play. However, the interesting thing with the gas tax is it is stipulant upon people filling up at the tank, and so that fluctuates throughout cycles. And as cars convert over to electric, it'll be interesting to see how that revenue is projected because it's based on the fuel tax, not electricity tax. So we're going to be working with our SACOG partners to see how that looks, how Senate Bill 1, because a lot of jurisdictions use Senate Bill 1 to repair their streets and local roads as well as to operate their transit systems. So that is a big source of state funding, and that ties into a lot of competitive state funding as well. So we can't control the competitive funding that comes to our region other than apply for it and be competitive, but we can't always anticipate how much is going to come to our region, but it could change the overall programs available for those types of funding sources. So that's one major source that we're looking at, and it'll be interesting to see how we can forecast that out. We typically, as I understand, forecast revenues on a block basis. We don't look at specific funding programs. We look at general assumptions for blocked federal, state, and local funding. So this is my first round at a regional transportation plan, so we're still working with SACOG and our partners on developing those forecasts, and they do take the lead since they have the resources to do so. And then we work with our local jurisdictions to present kind of our findings that we collectively establish, and then those get refined before they go into our final plan. So we'll be working on that. I don't have a full answer on the other sources, but to kind of go back to that federal discussion, the FAST Act or IIJA, or in the past it was ICE-T and all of those things, those are just different, and Safety Lou, those are all just different federal legislative acts that introduce a variety of different funding programs, some competitive, some formulaic. And so what was interesting, of course, in the IIJA bill is that it actually, on a global scale, provided approximately 30% more federal revenues than we've seen in the last couple of decades. But those are distributed among many different programs, and some new programs, some existing programs. So we're looking at that and seeing how that works, but even those programs aren't fully developed yet. So we're still trying to process all of that.
So that kind of gets me into the next one, is the proposition that was recently passed. I think it was a 27 or 30, whichever one it was, which is, yes, 30, okay.
Mm-hmm.
What is the conversation going on about some of the concerns related to that as far as funding sources?
We haven't dived into those specifics yet. Unfortunately, I can't answer that question, but it will be something we'll be looking at.
Okay, because obviously electric vehicles don't fill up.
Right.
And if the gas tax is one of our biggest funding sources, then, I mean, I'm just kind of stating the obvious, but
Right.
That's going to be a concern. So, okay, so maybe next time when you do come in, we can hear a little bit about some of the conversations that's going on in the office about those concerns and the funding sources that are going to be sorely missed if that continues.
Right.
And then also you mentioned the VNT. Okay, so I just want to encourage anything that you guys can possibly think of to do some outreach about the survey, because we all know if you don't vote, then you really don't have an argument to say. I mean, that's some kind of the feelings going on, especially this time of the year. So I see this as kind of one of those types of issues that if we don't get people to take the survey, then how much of a surprise should it really be when projects are implemented or funding is taken from one thing or given to another, vice versa, whatever it may be, whatever the actions are. So I'm certainly going to put the word out, but just for anybody who's watching, I can just only highly recommend that you just take 2 minutes. Yeah, I've already done it. I've already taken the survey. So just take like 2 minutes, I think it was, and do it, and you'll have an input on what's going on. So just my thoughts. So.
And I appreciate that. And just to add to that, to sweeten that proposition even more, there is an option after you take the survey to sign up for one of how many?
I think it's 5.
5 up to $100 valued gifts. And so, of course, it is randomly selected and you do have to take the survey. But that is something that, we want to encourage people and, entice them to also take the survey.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks.
All right, is that everything?
That's the first part. If there's no more questions, I can move on just to the second part.
Any questions at this point? All right, please proceed. All right.
So we went from a kind of high, broad level of planning under the regional transportation plan, and now we're going to come down to a yearly thing that we do, and it's kind of a more local-based project and planning process that we do. So under the umbrella and responsibility that we have as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, or RTPA for short. We are responsible for administering what's called the Transportation Development Act. It is a state of California piece of legislation that establishes two major funding sources that come to our local jurisdictions to help them with projects, primarily transit, but it also can be used for other purposes, which I'll get into in a minute. The first major source of funding is what's called Local Transportation Funds, or LTF. LTF is actually generated from a quarter-cent general sales tax statewide. It's applied at the local level, so it comes back to our region in a population-based formula and apportionment based on the amount of people that we have in the region and the amount of sales that we have in the region, sales tax. So that's the LTF. Then there's the State Transit Assistance Funds, or STA funding, and that's actually based on a statewide tax on gas and diesel. And so that is something that is primarily for just transit operators, but it's something that comes out at the pump every time someone fills in the pump. So next slide, please. The State Transit Assistance Funds, or STA funding, like I mentioned, can only go to support transit projects. That can be capital projects, it can be operation projects, it can be certain transit planning needs, but again, it can only go towards transit purposes. The LTF, which is the bigger pot of money, which is coming to our region based on population, that's intended for transit first. However, if we go through an annual process called the Unmet Transit Needs Assessment process, then we are able to, if there are no unmet transit needs that we can identify in that process, we are able to use and free up some of that money for other purposes such as street and road maintenance, which actually some of our local jurisdictions use LTF for streets and roads. Next slide, please. When we're looking at unmet transit needs, our PCTPA board adopts very specific criteria under the Transportation Development Act, under their authority under TDA, establishes both definitions for unmet transit needs and the definitions and criteria by which we look at for the second part of the lens, which is reasonable to meet criteria. In short, an unmet transit needs is something that does not, it's a service that doesn't exist. It's not being met somehow by existing services, or it's a service that isn't required, such as something that's required under the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. Then we look at if there is an unmet transit need, say there's a region or a part of the region like Sheridan, for instance, does not have any public transit services. We get a lot of calls for service to go out to Sheridan. But we also have to look at then the reasonable to meet criteria, because it can't just be an unmet transit needs, it has to meet both parts of that equation. Reasonable to meet criteria, in short, is something that if we are establishing a service to meet an unmet transit need, that service has to be feasible, viable, has to use existing funding, and at the end of the day, it has to be supported by a broad range of things, such as transportation plan documents that are already established, or even general broad public comment. It can't just be one or two or three people saying, I want a bus to come out to me. It has to be something that's financially viable to bring forward. Next slide, please. Looking in the past, those are some of the unmet transit needs in the past that were identified as reasonable to meet, which were actually addressed with the services you see on the slide before you. The most recent example that's as close to here as possible is in 2019, the Rockland-Lincoln dial-a-ride service was actually expanded to allow cross-jurisdictional trips for ADA-related passengers. So Americans with Disability Act essentially is a service that's kind of beyond and above and beyond fixed route transit services. It's typically curb to curb, door to door, or origin to destination. And essentially what was happening is those passengers would have to stop at the borders, transfer from one bus to the next. And in this process in 2019, there was an unmet transit need recognized that people could actually, in one trip, go across jurisdictional borders. So that was kind of an example of how we've addressed unmet transit needs in the past related to ADA. Next slide, please. In the annual unmet transit needs assessment process, we typically start our outreach for that process each year around September or October. This year, we actually began on October 1st with the launch of another survey that we're encouraging people to take specific to this process and specific to transit needs, which launched on our website if you go to pctpa.net/UTN. That survey is available all the way through this week. Is when the survey ends. And then after that survey ends, we're going to be working with our local transit providers as well as our Social Service Transportation Advisory Council, or SSTAC for short, which consists of different other nonprofit or other social service agency stakeholders or other residents in this region that help us evaluate those potential unmet transit needs based on the criteria that I mentioned before on the previous slides. That evaluation process happens through January, and then in February, we bring findings to our board that identify, is there an unmet transit need? If there is unmet transit needs, are they reasonable to meet? And if they are reasonable to meet, then they have to be addressed prior to us allocating LTF to a local jurisdiction for other purposes outside of public transit. Next slide, please. So how can the public get involved in this process? As I mentioned, the survey is the biggest way that we're encouraging members of the public to be to have their voice or potential unmet transit needs heard in this process. You can also submit forms directly to me with my information provided on the slide before you. And you can also take the survey if needed in Spanish and Tagalog. We do have the actual surveys available in those two languages on our website. However, if you are just taking it through the link, then that link is solely to the English version. So if you go to our main website, you'll be able to download a Spanish and Tagalog survey form. Next slide, please. With that, that concludes the presentation about unmet transit needs. I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Any questions, anyone?
I don't have any questions.
Okay.
I do have a question, and I don't even know if it's appropriate to ask you, but I'm going to ask anyway. I'm curious about the 80-65 interchange. You know, we did a lovely job on half of it. And what's the status of that program, that project?
Sure. That's one of our major projects at PCTPA. As Corey, I think, mentioned earlier in his part of the presentation, it's a phased project. There are several phases of that project that are actually identified in the current regional transportation plan, and those phases will be carried over into the next regional transportation plan. As I understand it, some of the phases have design that's already completed for them, and those phases are closer to the interchange itself, including reconfiguration of some of the interchange and some of the widening of 65 up to that interchange. But then there's other parts or phases of Highway 65 widening that go out to Lincoln, and those are all staged at different parts of the regional transportation plan based on when we anticipate getting funding for those types of phase advancements. So that's a project that's at one of the forefronts of our agency's efforts. We're always looking for money for that project, both the interchange and 65 widening all the way out to Lincoln. It's just acquiring and securing that funding. And the challenge that we're also having too is that the state of California, in the lens of CAPTI and in the lens of some of its other competitive grant programs that we would rely upon to get this funding for those projects, does not look favorably towards what they call capacity increasing projects. Or if we're adding a lane on 65, that's considered capacity increasing. And so when we add lanes or when we look at how we're increasing capacity on our local infrastructure projects like the interchange or like 65, we're also now looking at how can we incorporate other project elements like vehicle electric charging or high occupancy vehicle or even in the future toll lanes or whatnot. How can we look at those potential options to make these projects again more competitive and also achieve the goal of increasing some of the capacity on the existing infrastructure? So we're looking at that, and we're actually looking at 65 very closely right now. But the interchange itself has, I believe, almost design is completed for some of the interchanges, just the money we're waiting for, and some of the reconfigured components we're looking at with the state's new CAPTI lens.
Yeah, I can't remember about the interchange. I know that the 65 widening from, essentially from the interchange up to, I think it's Blue Oaks is fully designed. So as soon as we have the money, we'll dig some dirt, basically.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
We're looking forward to that.
Any other questions? Okay.
Just make sure to open public comment for this item before
Oh,
we
yeah,
close
I was
it.
just about to get to that. Thank you so much, Mike and Corey. Great presentation. Thank you. I'll now open the public comment period on this item. If you're already going to make a comment, please remember you're limited to 5 minutes, and to please state your name for the record, as well as fill out a blue card located on the podium and leave it on the podium. Are there anyone that wants to make public comment? Yes, sir. Come on up.
Take that. Hi, Commissioner and Chair Probst. Thank you for having me here, and thanks for the opportunity for public comment. Thank you for the Transportation Planning Agency. I think this kind of long-range planning is critical and crucial to running a effective government. I think this whole thing I have a lot of thoughts on, but it seems kind of a backwards way to plan things. Personally, it seems like we're all part of a big mega region, from the Bay all the way up to Reno. It's kind of a larger NorCal mega region, as you might say, and to me, it's kind of like fundamentally confusing to plan. Say everyone wants their own little project, and then you kind of combine them, and then bring it up to the next level, and then everyone wants their competing little project and combine it, and rather than necessarily a vision and a goal for the area, at least that I heard, and figuring out how smaller projects fit and build into that larger planning process. It feels very, and I might be wrong, it feels very parochial and like kind of breaking it down into these small chunks, which to me could lead to just a disjointed system. I don't think a bus user, a train user, a person particularly driving anywhere really cares what county they're in when they want to get somewhere. They want to get from their starting point to their destination. You see this all the time in the Bay. They have like 1 million transit agencies, and I don't really care if I have to take BART to Caltrain to VTA or whatever. I just want to get from A to B. And really minimizing those kind of, those disruptions in service, such as that project with the Lincoln, that dial-a ride. That sounds like a great way to, disrupt. You don't have to get off a bus and get back on another bus. I guess I think it's a good thing that the state is planning on reducing VMTs and basically wielding the big hammer of finance to do so. It's 2022. The world is still getting hotter, and that we're planning out to 2050. It's a long time from now, and I think it's a good thing, and I think that the county and cities can really embrace that and come up with projects that can really contribute to a mega region that works and is appropriately planning good projects for the continuance of civilization. I was wondering, and I think maybe you asked this, do you have to look at current projects with CAPTI? And I think you answered that, but I wrote it down before you said it. In general, I think road, transit planning, transportation, land use are all very interconnected. And so planning this, we need to think about how the land use of the area is integrated with this. If you have a denser urban form, like some of the projects that are ongoing in the city, then maybe you have fewer VMTs just inherently with there. If you have a large, low-density sprawl, you need to build new roads to get from A to B. I think that we should go with a fix-it-first mentality and not build new roads to new sprawling developments. And lastly, I really liked your survey. I thought it was great. Very interesting. Suggestion, maybe send it to the high schoolers. They're going to be in their early 40s by the time you're done. They'll probably be sitting here. And getting young people feedback on this kind of planning effort. It gets them involved in government, and it gets your ideas heard to a larger area. And I just encourage a step change in our transportation system. We got a ways to go, but I think this kind of planning effort is how we get there. So thank you very much. Oh, I'm not sure if I said it. My name's Derek Powell.
Derek? Okay, is there anyone else who wants to make public comment on this item? Okay. Now that there's nobody else, I will now close the public comment period. Commissioners, are there any additional questions or comments for staff at this time?
Yes, if you are thinking about advertising it to the high schools, I know juniors or seniors are more likely to have their license, so you can definitely email that to the schools. I'm sure they'll comply with that, but just to add on.
Any other comments from commissioners?
General comments?
Yeah.
Okay. Just a general comment. Congratulations to Pauline Rakucci, Krista Bernasconi, most likely Kevin Kiley and Joe Patterson. Job well done. We appreciate their leadership and effort, and we're looking forward to working with all of them in the region as well as our gentleman that came in tonight as well. So congratulations to all the candidates.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Groff. Any other comments?
Yeah, this is my last meeting on the commission, so thank you everybody for this experience.
We want to thank you, Marissa, for your service, and it's very inspiring. So thank you
Job
so
well
much.
done. Thank you.
you.
Okay, now on to commission and staff reports. Commissioners, do you have any items to report? We'll start with Audrey.
No.
I have none.
I guess that was my previous comments. But
Yeah, that was my comment too.
Okay. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Wait,
Oh,
you want-
what's me?
Oh, sorry.
No worries. All right, I can have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Oh, dang.
say second.
I second.
All right, moved has been motioned and seconded. All those in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, we are adjourned, folks. Thank you.
Came in there last time, right?
Yeah.